Hello, everyone. Thank you for attending my presentation. My sincerest apologies for not being able to be there in person, but I hope you enjoy my presentation on the reproduction of violence in resistance to cow vigilantism in India. Sorry about that. I just wanted to quickly just discuss a couple of things before getting into today's presentation. And it is essentially a disclaimer about how my presentation is not a debate on whether Hinduism prohibits or allows cow slaughter. The word Hindu itself to me as a Hindu is problematic, but it's just a colloquial term that I'm using in this discourse for sheer convenience. The way I practice Hinduism as a Punjabi person is going to be completely different than how a Hindu practices their faith in a different part of India. And this study and presentation is specifically on the ways in which human organizations that interpret Hinduism relate towards animals and their role in the production of violence. Now, before breaking down what's happening in cow protectionism, I just want to quickly go over cows and India. Now, cow protectionism at its core is linked to the concept of ahimsa in Hinduism, which is nonviolence. But not only Hindus value cows in India, non-Hindu groups participate in cow protection and have done so since time immemorial in India. Starting off with, it starts off at a use value for cows. Cows are useful as a food source in their production of dairy products, companionship given their docile nature, and can help out in labor related to agriculture. Their manure can be used in as fuel, and just anyone living in the Indus region are going to appreciate their cows for reasons that are not based on religion. And cow protection itself is also linked to civil disobedience and anti-colonialism, and you consider the ways in which cow protectionism was heavily brought up in the early 1900s and more organized than ever as a way to protest the British implementation of slaughterhouses in the Indus region. Slaughterhouses were seen as a violation between human and animal relationality amongst individuals in India, not just Hindus. So cow protectionism is not solely a religious phenomenon in India. Now, cow slaughter in India is it's a bit of a tricky issue because it's banned in 20 out of the 28 states, and there are the majority of individuals that work in cow slaughter are lower caste Hindus, often the Dalit community, commonly known as untouchable individuals, but the more appropriate term is Dalit, and Muslim Indians that make up the majority of slaughterhouses. These individuals are often vilified for working in these areas, but at the same time, upper caste Hindus refuse to work in this area, and there eventually needs to be someone that ends up dealing with cows that are left over from the dairy industry. India, despite being one of the most vegetarian countries in the world in terms of percentage, is not majority vegetarian. It is not mostly non-veg and has the second largest beef industry in the world. Cattle and sorry, I don't like using the word cattle. Cows that are not used in dairy or that have been used up in dairy often end up in slaughterhouses, either directly or through goshalas. Now, goshalas used to be cow shelters. They used to be places that were sanctuaries for cows, and specifically cows, not buffaloes, because cows have their own bovine animals have their own caste as well. Cows are considered pure and holy and worthy of protection, meanwhile buffalo are not. And cows are often subject to just roaming around the streets after farmers can no longer take care of them since they don't produce anything for them. And they either end up in goshalas, which are run by temples or local communities, but there's no government funding or even state funding in any state in India that consistently produces a safe space for cows. And even goshalas themselves there's not physically enough space to handle all the cows that leave the dairy industry. So they'll often get rid of them by handing them over to the slaughterhouse industry. The last thing about cow slaughter in India, the way cows are protected by the law is based on their ability to be used. Responsibility of cows and buffaloes is individualized by the state, so people are responsible for protecting their own cows. But this is solely because of their use value, not according to religion. Whether it's Hindu, Muslims, Christians, anyone in India are responsible for protecting their own cow because it's considered that cows have extraordinary use value for the average citizen and can help contribute towards prosperity. I need to discuss the appropriation of animal justice that's currently happening in India. This is currently occurring by the Bharatiya Janata Party, which is the BJP, which promotes a Hindutva ideology. So I want to point out on the left side of the screen, you're going to see two symbols, a flower and a flag. These are right-wing symbols for the RSS and the BJP. These are just symbols to be aware of because the saffron color is often used in Hindu nationalist rallies and movements. And when discussing Hindu nationalism, we need to focus on Hindutva, which is a specific type of Hindu nationalism that advocates for an Indian state based on a Hindu nation and religion. Non-Hindus are excluded from this Indian society because they're seen as foreign invaders, and their descendants are seen as foreign invaders. Current BJP and Hindu nationalist politicians have endorsed harsh penalties for anyone that violates a cow slaughter ban, including the death penalty. And when it comes to animal justice, it's more of a welfare issue in India because only cows are quote unquote protected in India. These cows are not protected by any means. Once a cow is used up in a dairy industry or dairy household, that they can be abandoned without any repercussions for them. There's no state initiatives to take care of these cows. And like I said before, cow protection shelters, they're run by temples, they're run by locals. So this is a single animal. This is a single issue when it comes to single rights issue when it comes to animals. This is about a very pseudo form of animal welfare for cows, and has nothing to do with justice for animals overall. Now, I want to discuss cow vigilantism. These individuals you see in this picture are an example of what they would look like. Just saffron colored scarves around them and decorating cows, and they refer to themselves as Gorakshiks, which means cow protectors. And they will violently uphold cow protection through the use of physical and sexual violence, financial extortion, and societal exclusion. Any individual accused of harming a cow or eating a cow can be subject to any of those forms of violence, which is often carried out by these individuals. And before I discuss anything else, I wanted to bring up a sociological concept called homo saucer and governmentality. Now, Homo saucer refers to the concept of bare life, which is made by Giorgio Agamben, and it is about a body that can be killed by anyone outside the law without having to face consequences. So these individuals that allegedly harm cows can be violently harmed, societally excluded. A lot of different messed up things can happen to them, and they're participating in these actions outside of the law. I want to take you to take a look at the three stick figures at the bottom. An individual on the left can be taken into an orange zone, which I refer to as state of exception. In this state of exception, anything is fair game to happen to them. They can be violently attacked or anything like that. And after that, they're just let go. It's a way to reinforce current state institutions, in this case, Hindutva ideology, and lower caste Hindus and non-Hindus that work in cow slaughter are often, which are hereditary professions for these groups, they're often vilified for that role. They're dragged into Hinduism through Hindutva, punished, and then excluded again. And a unique governmentality is produced where governing is occurring from afar. Any Hindutva-aligned politician can govern from afar through the use of Gorakshiks, cow protection agents, by producing violence against anyone they deem or accuse of messing up any cow. Their will and Hindu nationalist will can be inflicted upon them. I want everyone to take a look at some of these images because this is how resistance to cow slaughter bans in India have occurred. On the left, we see gentlemen protesting, stating "my food, my right." The bottom left, you see individuals in the state of Kerala that are participating in a beef eating festival. In the middle, you have an activist who's comparing using cow masks and having models wear cow masks to gain attention because it raises awareness for sexual violence that women face across India. The message is maybe if someone looks like a cow, they'll receive more attention from the state. And on the right, something a little bit more transparent, where certain communities claim that eating beef is their identity and that the ban on beef is historical ignorance. These are just some of the ways in which resistance towards cow slaughter bans have occurred. And current criminology engagement with this isn't too good, in my opinion. It's focusing on restorative justice that focuses on welfare laws to improve treatment of cows, but doesn't talk about abolishing it. There's emphasis on community collaboration and a needs approach. The issue with this is you're fundamentally asking different religious groups to kind of get along, which doesn't always work, especially not when one of them is in power. And some criminological engagement has advocated for wholly permitting cow slaughter of any kind, not just buffaloes, allowing cows to be killed in any way, anywhere, or completely banning any bovine slaughter, which I will say is radical, but then the issue comes down to the focus is only on cows. It's not to any other animal. Both of these approaches, they advocate for increased powers to the police and the surveillance state, which is already an issue in India and for more power to the police and surveillance mechanisms so that individuals can be monitored doesn't exactly make me overly comfortable with that idea. And greater powers to individual states in determining slaughter bans doesn't really help, considering the inconsistency throughout the country that will happen in regards to how cows can be treated. Now, I come from a perspective in green criminology, which brings all the tenets of traditional criminology, but is more critical. We extend everything that regular criminology has, but we just extend that consideration to animals and land. So, victimization, personhood, justice, these are all concepts that we can apply to animals and land as well. And different frameworks that dominate and exploit non humans, both animals and the land, are examined. Now, green criminology challenges anthropocentrism. Anthropocentrism is the perspective in which human interests are put before land and animals. This is the way most of the world functions right now, where development of land or farming of animals, eating them, or anything like that is often framed through an anthropocentric narrative. Biocentrism is also challenged. This is the notion that all of the non-human animals' nature has intrinsic value that needs to be protected under any cost, which in theory sounds nice, but ignores how certain humans might suffer a lot of victimization and damage in the pursuit of valuing animals and land. And green criminology examines the potential of ecocentrism, something I discuss later on as something I think that is radical. Ecocentrism is the middle ground here. Actually, not the middle ground. I reject both bio and anthropocentrism. It is something that acknowledges the value in both humans and the non-human. All living things, all sentient beings, flora, fauna, they're recognized as important social actors in the globe with their own roles, and the way to find balance amongst all these entities is the endless and ongoing pursuit. Now, when it comes to slaughterhouse bans, there's some limitations simply because violence is only really addressed against the humans. With all the different forms of protest, whether it's the images, the beef festivals, the marches, it's addressing violence from Hindutva towards people. But if we look at this little image I made over here, these red arrows that point towards animals and the environment, just using the globe, those aren't addressed. There's a bit of anthropocentrism occurring in these protests they're protesting an arguably fascist, really right-wing regime. But at the same time, we're only focusing on human identity, culture, and rights. There's no consideration of what's happening to the animals or what's happening to the land. Now, when it comes to the environmental harms, aside from what matters for the animals, discussions around beef consumption and the consumption of cow is particularly problematic because of the oversight on how problematic beef is from an environmental standpoint. I'm not just talking about carbon emissions, I'm also talking about methane emissions. Cows, as much as they might have use value, when they're mass farmed the way they are in India or anywhere in that world, are a significant contributor towards all the problems that arise from climate change. This is overlooked in the preservation of human identity, culture, and rights. And another thing about the current protests, the relationality towards animals shifts from welfarism to domination. Even if it's a very flawed and limited form of animal welfarism, the Hindutva ideology of cow protection has some semblance of care for cows, even though it's grossly misguided. To shifting this towards domination occurs by advocating for the consumption of cow, citing legal rights, cultural rights, and reproduction of maintaining one's own heritage. My argument is that the structural production of harms against humans and cows, they're only partially challenged. And I'd argue that one of the only ways to challenge this is through veganism. The same form of violence that's inflicted upon non-Hindus and lower caste Hindus that are accused of eating cow, that same kind of violence is still being reproduced. It's just humans are no longer the only ones experiencing it. Animals, specifically cows, are experiencing it. Animals that aren't cows are also experiencing it because they're ignored in discussions of welfare and animal rights. And land is suffering as a result of this as well. So for future steps, I would like to see continued scholarship from ecofeminism, critical animal studies, sociology, environmental studies, every discipline. But at the same time, every one of these disciplines ought to be having an ecocentric perspective. The consideration of both land and animals, it has to be occurring. Both land and animals are distinct, but they're at the same time interconnected and vital aspects of the non-human. I'd also like to call for more reinterpretations of Hindu mythology. A lot of my research was inspired by Yamini Narayanan, who reinterprets Hindu mythology and Hindu stories of Krishna, who's often seen as a lover of butter and a lot of dairy. She points out how a lot of upper caste Hindus point out how Krishna consumed dairy products, but they often forget that he was separated from his mother, was not allowed to consume his mother's milk, just as dairy calves in the dairy industry aren't. The reinterpretation of Hindu mythology is one way in which different forms of Hinduism might be reclaimed in an effort to protest the current narrative of what Hinduism is from the BJP. Lastly, I'd like to see collaboration from vegans working in communities that are historically marginalized by caste-based violence. And this includes working with vegans in these communities, vegans that are from Dalit communities, Muslim vegans within India, Hindu vegans in India as well, that are taking anti-caste approaches towards their activism. Thank you so much for for attending my presentation, and I wish you guys all the best in your future pursuits as we try to make academia more productive and just help out everyone around us, land, humans, animals, everyone.